I'm Joanne Leedom Ackerman'ın, former International Secretary and Vice President Emeritus of PEN International. I first visited Turkey for the inaugural gathering in Istanbul in March 1997. At the time, I was chair of PEN International's Writers in Prison Committee and was joined by 21 other writers from around the globe. We, along with over 1,000 Turkish writers and publishers, had signed on to be, quote, publishers for the volume Freedom of Thought, a book which reissued articles which had run afoul of Turkey's laws against, quote, insulting the state. The book included work by noted authors, including Yasir Kemal. None of us aspired to go to prison in Turkey, but we understood the importance of showing up and showing solidarity with our Turkish colleagues. During that gathering, we visited prisons where writers and publishers were incarcerated, and we visited courtrooms where they were being charged. In the subsequent decade, conditions for writers in Turkey have improved. An amnesty was called. Some of the oppressive legislation was replaced, though with other articles in the Penal Code. But the climate that opened, which we took hope in, seems to have closed again. We are here today at the gathering in Istanbul for the first time in 21 years when it is too problematic to be in Istanbul. But we are here, and the organizers are steadfast and in Turkey. More writers are in Turkey than anywhere else in the world. And depending on the statistics of the day, there are 250 journalists and media workers in prison, 200 media outlets have been closed, and thousands of academics and civil servants have been released from their jobs or are facing charges. The organizers, though, are still working, and that is what gives us hope in Turkey. It is the heart and the commitment of individuals who understand that freedom of expression is central to a free society and work towards that end that should give us hope. For the gathering in Istanbul, it was suggested that we look at freedom of expression around the globe, not just in Turkey. My general observation is that the world itself is reversing directions from 20 years ago, when many of us thought that authoritarianism would be yielding globally to democracy and freedom. The situation in my own country, the United States, is more fraught than it has been in my lifetime in the relationship between the government and the media. But the press is protected in the U.S. by the U.S. Constitution, by laws, by history, and by society. The majority of U.S. citizens still remain committed to protect freedom of expression and to remain vigilant. I fear, however, that we are preoccupied with our own challenges sometimes, to the exclusion of much more dire challenges around the world. I also fear that we've lost credibility and impact when we speak out. Yet, as an American, I can hold vigils in front of prisons, I can sit in courtrooms, I can write articles and books, meet with ministers, and then return home. I am able to write and to speak without being worried about being imprisoned or killed. I'd like to focus the rest of my talk on the courageous writers in the democracy movement in China, especially after the death of Liu Xiaobo, the Nobel Peace Laureate, who died last July in prison, having served 9 of his 11 years for his, quote, inciting subversion of the state because of his participation in drafting and circulating Charter 08. I have the privilege of being the editor of the English language version of the memorial collection of Liu Xiaobo. The collection includes writings from dozens of Liu's colleagues inside and outside China. They knew him and paid tribute to the man, his ideas, and the consequential voice he had in articulating and taking action on behalf of a free society. One of the authors of Charter 08, a document signed by hundreds of Chinese writers, intellectuals, and citizens, Liu and Charter 08 set out a democratic version and vision and a path for China, using the rule of law and consensus, not weapons and violence. His fellow Chinese writers and thinkers hoped, and I hope, that eventually this vision will prevail. They remind me of the writers and thinkers in Turkey who are committed to ideas and the rule of just laws and to nonviolent means to bring about a change and wrest society from authoritarian modes. Liu Xiaobo understood that a free society begins with the individual consciousness of the individual citizens. In his final statement, "I have no enemies," he addressed the court, quote, "Hate only eats away at a person's intelligence and conscience, and an enemy mentality can poison the spirit of an entire people. The human feeling within a society can be blocked. It can block the progress of a nation towards freedom and democracy. For these reasons, I hope that I can rise above my personal fate and continue to progress of our country to the changes in our society. I hope that I can answer the regime's enmity with the utmost benevolence and can use love to dissipate hate." Such a statement was difficult for many to accept, especially after he died. Many questioned whether he would have expressed the same sentiments had he known his end. I've been assured by those who knew him well that he would have stood by his statement. His commitment was rooted in his view of himself and of what it would take to change society. A longtime colleague of his has observed that Liu Xiaobo, quote, "viewed the world through the boundaries of his own making. Whatever he wouldn't want to allow in his life, he was also unwilling to allow in the world. For instance, if he didn't have violent tendencies in his own life, he would not let the behavior of others impose on him. If he valued freedom and autonomy, he would not become mired in hatred because of the crimes of others, since hateful people were dominated by the other side. If he experienced the good thing and positive feelings of human life, he knew all the more that he must allow what was good and open to take root in himself, and not what was biased and narrow-minded. His life was oriented toward love and light, not towards hatred and darkness. This was his own decision, and what he was willing to take upon himself. Every person writes his own history. Other people could choose to go along with Liu Xiaobo or advance alongside of him, but there was no need to feel that this was his error or flaw that must be corrected or surmounted. 20 years have passed like a day, and he was a trailblazer for the people who insisted on their own ideas. China lacks trailblazers like Liu Xiaobo, and that is what allowed him to become a standard bearer for the Chinese democracy movement and gain the widespread endorsement of the international community." Unquote. A small number of Chinese writers drafted Charter 08. Hundreds, then thousands, signed the charter, but only one person went to prison and died. No one knows and few can predict the success of Charter 08 as a vision and the ultimate impact of Liu Xiaobo. But history has a long arc and may well bend to those who see our common humanity and universal value of freedom for the individual. By focusing on the individual's responsibility for his own behavior and consciousness, Liu offered the tools to empower all. For no government has the mandate over one's own individual consciousness. There, the individual gets his own or her own terms of engagement with the world. In reading these essays of the many Chinese writers who knew Liu Xiaobo and admired him and his vision, I also think of Turkish writers and artists I've had the privilege to know over the years, who continue to work towards a free society. The two countries' circumstances are different, and many would say that Turkey is not as extreme as China. But in all the years I have been working with PEN, it was Turkey and China who placed the most writers under pressure. In China, the sentences were longer and often harsher, but there were more writers under pressure in Turkey. But in both nations, the individual voices of writers, publishers, and artists continue to inspire. Thank you.